Hi guys. Can you guys all hear me and see me? It's really good to see all of you. I see that you guys are already ready to go and chat about this, which is awesome. I put together a little bit of bonus content, so I'll get to that maybe towards the end because I want to make sure I get through your questions first, and I can always put the bonus content in like a follow-up video or something like that. But first and foremost, thank you guys for being here. I see lots of questions already, which is super exciting. So I'm going to dive right into all the questions, and I'm going to go through any bonus content at the end. And the nice thing too is I find Tuesday evenings, there's a lot more time to go through Q&A, so it's perfect. Okay, so hi Jenny. Hi Jenny and Summer and Nellie. Who else is on here? Hi Brian. Who else is here? Oh, you guys are really sweet to each other. Hi, Daniel. How's it going? Hey, Anna. And Minu and Ruby. Hey, Jermaine. Good to see you guys. And Pedro. Awesome. Good to see you guys. Okay, cool. So let's go into some of the questions for this evening. And I will go through the bonus content at the end here. So first, Jenny says, I feel so messy in relationships when the person is dismissive avoidant. And so far, you pushed enter too early, Jenny. So far, that's who I am attracted to. I know self-soothing will help with that, examining my stories and not reacting from them. Anything else that will help? Okay, so it's actually amazing because I just was making a video about this. And I posted it, but I'll go through a few really key and important steps and tools. So first and foremost, that's one of the major challenges for the anxiously attached individuals, that they didn't really get the opportunity in their programming to learn how to effectively self-soothe. So what happens is you go into relationships years later, and if you look at all of the relationships in the anxiously attached individual's life, most of these relationships are like, let's say you're having a hard day at work. Maybe you go and you talk to your best friend about it. Maybe you go and you talk to your partner about it. Maybe you go and you're always talking to all these different people, but you're not necessarily tuning in and consulting with yourself and actually practicing self-soothing. So we get these ideas or these concepts that basically say, hey, you're anxiously attached and you're going to struggle with self-soothing. And the reality is it's just a set of programs you have. It does not have to stay that way. So everywhere you look at, let's say, a weakness or a drawback, I don't even want to say weakness, it's just a set of programs, but anywhere where there is a drawback in how the anxiously attached individual is experiencing life, so challenges self-soothing, sometimes disconnected or dissociated from their own feelings and needs, self-sacrificing, poor boundaries, often repressing how they feel to sort of people please others, to not rock the boat and to not lose anybody, really strong fears of abandonment, of loss, these sorts of things. Wherever these pop up, remember, these are all transformable things. You didn't come into the world with this set of programs. They got programmed into you through repetition plus emotion over time. And we can use that same set of foundational principles to change those patterns or programs. So, Jenny, when you say you feel messy in relationships when the person is dismissive avoidant. So, of course, I see this all the time, right? And you feel messy because basically you're in a relationship with somebody who's going to push all of your core wounds, right? So anything that's living inside of you, this person's basically exacerbating. They're like magnifying in the relationship. They're touching you in all the places that it hurts, right? So number one, you want to identify, and this is for everybody on here who's anxiously attached or just who's with an anxiously attached partner, wants to learn about anxious attachment, you want to identify all of your core wounds, okay? So what are the core wounds that are getting pushed? What are the patterns? And I would almost try to rate them from like most severe and intense to least severe. So it might be abandonment, fear of abandonment coming up first, feeling rejected coming up second, feeling not good enough coming up third. Whatever it is, put those wounds in order, the patterns that trigger you most in your relationship, okay? And if you're doing this for a partner, you're here and you think your partner's anxiously attached, which I'm not sure if there's any of you guys on here that think that, but if that's the case, what you want to do is write out what you think their wounds are. And I'll give you some tools and strategies for how to sort of mitigate those in the relationship, so that you don't have to be on the end of always triggering that person in the relationship either. And you have some strategies. So what you want to do is put all the things together that are causing you pain, Jenny. And then from there, you want to start working through them one by one so that you actually have some habits and strategies. Now, on a daily basis, as you're going through that part of the process, on a daily basis at the same time, there are a few things that you want to work on. So number one, actively self-soothing, like we're talking about. And what this means is set the intention to not go to anybody. So let's say, and I don't mean like on a permanent basis, I don't mean like don't speak to anybody anymore. I mean specifically in those circumstances where you're feeling emotion and your like knee-jerk reaction or instinct is to go to a friend, a parent, whoever it is to go to. Sit with yourself first and set the intention, I'm not going to go to anybody outside of myself to soothe my feelings until I first soothe them myself. And this is honestly a fantastic habit to get into, because usually when we go to other individuals and we say, hey, this is how I'm feeling, I need help or I need support. Usually we go and we actually get the most out of our interactions when we're requesting support, when we're clear on what we're feeling, when we're clear on why we're feeling it, when we're clear about what we need, versus, I don't know if anybody in here has had the experience, but if you've ever had the experience of feeling like a 9 or a 10 out of 10 emotional, and maybe you're triggered or something, challenging happened in your life, some work stress or whatever it might be, and you're not really clear on what you're feeling or what you're needing. And then you go to somebody, you ask for support, and maybe at a subconscious level, support for you means a hug, or maybe it means validation and words of affirmation. Maybe it's something specific, but if you don't consciously know what it is and you don't consciously communicate it to the person you're reaching out to, you might often feel like, oh, I just reached out to this person. I was just trying to connect and they didn't even meet my needs. I'm going through all this pain and they didn't show up for me. And usually when individuals are feeling that way, it's because they're not understanding exactly what their needs are. So when they go to get those needs met from somebody or something outside of them, it often feels incomplete in the end. So what does self-soothing mean? Self-soothing means getting clear about what you're feeling, getting clear about why you're feeling it, working through the stories. I'm sure everybody at this point understands the story component. If you haven't already gone through the emotional mastery course, highly recommend doing that. But we talk about it in each of the attachment style courses a little bit. So what you want to do is work through your story. And then once you've done all of that, identify, okay, what do I need right now to feel supported? How can I give that to myself first, if you're setting the intention to self-soothe? And it may not feel comfortable at the beginning. It may not feel amazing, like, oh, wow, that just got all of my needs met, because your subconscious mind it's like a habit. It's like an addiction in a way, where it's used to getting the needs met and the feeding from outside of itself. But you want to practice like rehabituating that. So through repetition plus emotion, keep showing up for yourself, keep committing to yourself, and to meeting your own needs, and then go to somebody outside of yourself once you're in a space where you're really clear and you're congruent about everything that's going on inside of you. Okay, so that's a really important first step. Okay, step number 2, and I think, Jenny, you said this, like examining your stories and not reacting from them. Excellent. But remember, after you do the story work, you can also check back in with your partner after you've done this work yourself and self-soothed. You can also check back in with your partner and you can say, look, this is what I'm needing in this situation. This is what would make the relationship better. And those of you that are struggling with a dismissive avoidant partner who is very dismissive avoidant and isn't responding well to your expression of feelings and needs, don't go through all the feeling process stuff. Just go through expressing what your need is in a positive form. So instead of saying, for example, hey, you didn't meet this need, this is what I need next time, just tell the person, hey, this is what I appreciate in a relationship. This is what I need in general. So for example, let's say you graduated from some program. You went back to school, decided to do some program, and you felt like you didn't get any congratulations or positive emotional validation from your dismissive avoidant partner. Maybe instead of going, if you find that this person is very difficult to communicate with, maybe instead of going, hey, you didn't appreciate me, or you didn't validate me or encourage me, and that, is really important to me next time. Instead, just go up to the person and just say, hey, validation and positive reinforcement is so important to me around, any rite of passage that I go through, any graduation, any job offer, promotion. These things are so important to me and they make me feel loved. And so, can we try to instill these habits in the relationship? And doing things like that can be a really great place to start. Your second option is that if you have somebody who, no matter what, when you express the needs in a healthy way, in a grounded way, in a positively oriented format, and you're doing all these different things and they're not showing up, you have the answer for you right there. This is probably not the right relationship. A relationship does require an exchange of energy. It does require a healthy balance of giving and receiving. Conflict is born out of a perception of imbalance over time, okay, that can occur in the sense of time, space, energy, or matter. So whenever there's this imbalance ongoing, that imbalance is always going to create these breeding grounds for conflict. So we have to express, but we want to learn to practice self-soothing first as the anxiously attached individual. Okay. So let me just see what happens when the DA sees even my saying how I feel as an attack or criticism. Okay, so I answered your question ahead of time without meaning to. So Jenny, what that means is just try to phrase your needs in a positive format. Try to come from that space. And again, if the person still isn't willing to show up, and you're doing this and you're practicing and you're creating sort of like a safe space for the dismissive avoidant because they really value their safety and their consistency, and you're doing this and then you're communicating your needs and nobody's showing up at all, even from the positive format, to be quite honest, my recommendation for you would be to probably not stay in that relationship. And I understand for some people, you're married, you have kids, it's not a financial possibility to leave. And I, of course, take that all into consideration. But I think it's important to also be able, as the anxiously attached individual, which is probably almost all of you guys in here today, I think it's really important that you also remember to show up for yourselves and speak up for yourselves and set a boundary. And as you start to do that in the relationship, keep in mind too, usually what I see is as the anxiously attached individual starts speaking up for themselves, showing up for themselves, usually everything else starts to transform in that relationship dynamic. So usually the relationship gets better, gets healthier. But in the times that the person retracts more because suddenly you have needs, we know that that's not somebody who's able and capable to give and receive and have this exchange in the relationship. Okay. Hi, Summer. So Summer says, the hijacking of the nervous system when I'm activated is something like is something I'd like to gain control of. It feels like an automatic reflex that's hard to stop once in motion. Okay, so this is a really great topic. There's two types of anxiety that we experience. There's amygdala-based anxiety and there's frontal lobe-based anxiety. Okay, and most individuals, when you're feeling anxious, you're kind of going through a combination of both. So amygdala-based anxiety is the type of anxiety that's automatic. Okay, so it's the sort of body hijacking where you just feel all of this emotion in your body, even though like maybe tightness in your chest or panic, constriction in your throat, like your whole body sort of tightening. And amygdala-based anxiety is based on deep programmed associations. So like one really clear example of amygdala-based anxiety would be if you've ever been scared by a friend or a family member, somebody jumps out from behind a door or whatever, and they scare you. And before your conscious mind can even come online and be like, that's scary, and make an interpretation about it, your whole body's already reacted. So this is amygdala-based anxiety. It's sort of that automatic fight or flight mode. And this is what you're referring to when you're talking about the hijacking of the nervous system. What you're actually referring to is amygdala-based anxiety. On the other hand, when there's this frontal lobe anxiety, it's because your brain is telling all these stories about the past or the future. So your internal dialogue is on autopilot and your mind is going, what if this happens? What if that happens? And those thoughts are producing emotion that is rooted in anxiety. Those anxious thoughts are creating anxious feelings, and those feelings are creating neurochemical reactions. Okay, so you've got your cortisol, your adrenaline, norepinephrine, all this stuff that's happening because of the frontal lobe anxiety, which is basically the way that you're thinking. So I hope that makes sense so far. So when we're dealing with amygdala-based anxiety, when we're dealing with, and I have this all, just so you guys know, I just finished recording the anxiety course like a few days ago, a week ago maybe. And so that's going to come out in like just over a week. And so I talk a lot about how to handle this in here. But in a high level sort of format for this webinar, how you best deal with amygdala-based anxiety is to understand what the triggers are and to try to find context, because this isn't about somebody jumping out from behind a door and you thinking that there's a survival threat. At a deep level, if you pay close attention, there will be patterns that are occurring that are creating that amygdala-based anxiety. So let me take a guess at what most of you are experiencing when it comes to the amygdala-based anxiety. It's usually like this for the anxiously attached individual. It's like somebody is MIA, your partner stops responding to you, a friend, a family member, whatever it is, and you have this intense visceral response in your body. And you may not have even thought, too much about a story yet. Or maybe somebody does something strange. They withdraw, they pull back, they do something, and you notice a change in the pattern. And you have this visceral response before your mind can even get into storytelling mode. Then the visceral response, that amygdala-based anxiety, will then trigger your frontal lobe anxiety, which will basically rev up your mind to start thinking about all the possibilities of what could be going wrong and what's bad. Okay. And the reason that you're experiencing this amygdala-based anxiety is that there's a deep programmed dissociation in your subconscious mind that says, when there's space, people will leave. And usually we see this the most strong for anxiously attached individuals that went through some kind of long-term for a child. So this could be like 3 months, 6 months, being separated from a primary caregiver or a secondary caregiver if they were also very close to that caregiver. So there's actually a feeling or experience of abandonment. We can also see this if there is, if somebody was put up for adoption, abandoned, or if there were just a lot of consistent, intense patterns of parents working a lot. So here's what we do, okay? Sometimes you'll hear people say things like your body is your subconscious mind, and it's because your body and your subconscious mind are very closely connected. So what we do when this experience happens, when you've got that amygdala-based anxiety and it's that huge visceral response, is we start by getting in touch with our body. And we start by trying to relax our body, our muscles, everything. And then we use our conscious mind to sort of reparent our subconscious mind and say things like, I'm safe. Everything's going to be okay. I'm not being abandoned. If I were to be abandoned, if that's my worst case scenario, I'm still going to be safe and fine on my own. The amygdala is deeply associated with safety. So when you're in that like intense response, some aspect of you is feeling or is activated at a subconscious level that thinks there's a threat to your survival. So it's really important when you're experiencing this to just slow down, try to intentionally relax your body, relax your shoulders, your chest, your neck, everything. Try to relax. And when you're relaxing intentionally, through repetition over time as you repeat this, you're basically reprogramming those stored associations in that moment through your body. So if your body's tensing, and as soon as the tensing happens, all the muscles tighten, the contraction, all of these are still signals for you to keep producing neurochemicals like cortisol and adrenaline. So as you relax your body, you're sort of turning off some of those signals. And as you're enforcing or reinforcing to yourself that you're safe, you're sort of speaking to that amygdala-based part of yourself. And it's not going to be something it changes everything 10 out of 10, okay? Because again, when we're dealing with amygdala-based anxiety, these are deeply programmed associations over time that we had, or let's say had input into us, or were programmed into us through usually a lot of repetition or a really strong emotional experience. So we want to just commit to that process. We want to be able to keep relaxing, keep letting ourselves know that we're okay, we're safe. And it can also help if you look at, okay, what's the worst case scenario that could happen to me right now? And how would I be okay and safe, even if that worst case scenario happened? And just try to look at like all of those possibilities your brain is fearing, and then work through your stories after you've practiced that first part. Because that first part is targeting the amygdala-based anxiety, the working through your stories and questioning your thoughts, looking for equilibration to return to that like healthy and balanced mindset. All of those follow-up steps, what those do is they work with the frontal lobe-based anxiety. So does that make sense, you guys? That's a very important thing to do. Jenny says, is it possible to heal anxious attachment and not be in a relationship? Absolutely. What you'll find is that when you jump back into a relationship, you'll find that there are some little triggers that do pop back up. But you can do the majority of your healing outside of a relationship for sure. It's actually, if you're outside of a relationship right now, I recommend doing that now, because you'll make it that much easier when you get into a relationship, and you won't have to kind of learn everything the hard way. And how you do that is you work on those belief pattern programs. You work on creating healthy habits to support yourself. You big time work on expressing your feelings, your needs, developing healthy boundaries, boosting your self-esteem through doing that. And the more you're doing all these things in all of the relationship interactions in your life, your family, your friendships, you're preparing yourself to dive into a romantic relationship and have success. Okay, great question. Absolutely. And Summer's answering that as well. I feel like we're all connected here because I keep either answering questions that are the next question, or people are answering questions in sort of the same way. So Summer says, Jenny, absolutely possible to heal when not in a relationship. In fact, much easier if not with another insecure person who is not working on himself. Good answer. Okay, Nellie, I am interested in the hijacking part as well. Okay, beautiful. Yeah, it feels like an automatic reflex because it basically is an automatic reflex. But what you can teach your brain that, hey, this doesn't have to be, you didn't like come into this world and know that when somebody sent you a short or rude text message over the phone, that means they're leaving you, and you didn't even know what a text message was, right? So you have these layers and layers of programmed interpretations about the world. And those are what are creating those like automatic responses based on the previously stored programmed information you've developed about them. Does that make sense? It's like, this is a really like strong example, but I just wanted to illustrate. So sometimes I work with women who are like sexual abuse victims and who were raped or went through things like that. And these women, even though their conscious mind knows better, these women might walk into a room that has predominantly men, and usually their first set of feelings is panic, fear, overwhelm, like, you know, these responses. If there was a really intense program, that painfully programmed association between and just to be clear, like, this can be men with women or women with men. Obviously, it's a little more common with women. And so what happens is, even though the conscious mind knows better, there's this subconscious aspect that's made this association. Okay, men equals a lack of safety. And if that's an association stored in the subconscious, and then there's this natural knee-jerk output. Now, prior to that, maybe thousands, maybe decades before that, maybe that woman who was raped in her, 20s or 30s, maybe she was really close with her father and felt totally safe around her father as a child. So we didn't come in with these things. Most of these associations that are creating those knee-jerk reactions were actually programmed because of past experiences. And another thing you guys can do, and you can keep in mind, is for really deep stuff, I have a transforming trauma course coming out. I'll probably launch it in December. I've already recorded it, but if you guys want to, I was just going to put it in order of what I'm like, the feedback I'm getting. So if that's something that's really important to you guys, let me know. But it talks about how to do like even deeper reprogramming work around those traumatically stored associations. And that can be very helpful as well. Okay, good. I love that encouragement, Summer. That's awesome. And I like your feedback here, Summer. You're sharing with Jenny. Some are saying the anxious, preoccupied, and dismissive avoidant is a challenging dynamic. It's probably the toughest dynamic, just because the needs are so polar opposite. But self-loving is the key to healing. Yes, I absolutely agree with that. But a lot of people are like, what the heck is self-love? Self-love, you can't actually self-love until you start to have habits. Like, imagine you have a partner right now, a romantic partner, and imagine that they go away for 5 years, and when they come back, you haven't even been really in contact with them for 5 years. And then when you come back, you expect everything to just like, how do I love this person immediately? How do I feel super comfortable and, head over heels in love with this person when I haven't even uttered a word to them for 5 years, or I've hardly spoken with them at all for 5 years. And so, it takes, just like you would start rekindling a relationship with a loved one, it takes time to warm up again. And we fall back in love with ourselves, right? Or with the person you didn't see for 5 years, through asking questions, getting to know the person, understanding where they're at, what their feelings are. Just like if you start dating somebody, you start to get to know the person. You have those conversations. You start to know them, and then you can like them because you know the person. And then it creates the breeding grounds to fall in love. And the same principles apply in the relationship with ourselves. Okay? So really important. Yeah, Nelly, the more critical internal dialogue you have, the more the anxious attachment is just going to feel like it's spiraling out of control. And it's just super important to make sure that you're showing up for yourself. When you catch yourself having these self-defeating, self-blaming thoughts, pause and question them, okay? And try to find proof of otherwise. We don't need to be coming from a space where we're sitting here telling ourselves this story about how we're the worst person on the planet, and then 5 seconds later feel like we're the best person on the planet. But the ideal is to return to the balanced state of mind so we can see, okay, I can't actually know that I'm the worst person on the planet. That's a deluded thought that I'm telling myself, and I'm creating my own suffering accordingly. And remember, we have the most power and authority over our emotional responses, more than anybody outside of us. So if we're thinking those thoughts, we can basically be guaranteeing that we're feeling those feelings. So when we can get in control of our stories and these obsessive or repetitive thoughts that are just the result of painful past programs, and we can change them, and you can just do a pattern interruption. You can just be like, cancel, and replace them with something healthier. You can just do a thought upgrade. It can be simple if you need it to be. But then you stop going through that painful spiral of hurting yourself. And we will never show up as the best versions of ourselves in any relationships if that's what we're bringing in, right? So it's super important to heal yourself and prepare for that next relationship by correcting those painful patterns of internal dialogue. And that can be, you make a mistake and you're like, I'm the worst person on the planet. And you're like, okay, hold on. This is self-abusive internal dialogue. This is self-blaming. Let me just upgrade my thought. Okay, I'm not the worst person on the planet, and I'm going to choose to learn and grow from this experience, right? You can just have like a cognitive reframe. It doesn't have to be, I'm the best person and these are all the reasons why. We don't have to delude ourselves in the positive form. We just don't want to be abusing ourselves when it's not even rooted in truth whatsoever on the negative side, okay? Hi, Brian. I'm 8 weeks out of a breakup. I'm sorry to hear that. With someone who is an avoidant attachment style. I initially thought it might be fearful avoidant, but it increasingly seems dismissive. We started communicating again over the last 2 weeks. They're polite, but there's definitely a coldness bordering on hostility at times. So remember, if an anxious is with a fearful avoidant, what's likely to happen is the fearful avoidant will start becoming more dismissive over time. And then you'll sort of experience, because usually it's sort of one attachment style for the fearful avoidant tends to polarize them into the other category. So if you are, let's say, dismissive avoidant and you're with the fearful avoidant, they're going to start becoming the much more anxious side of themselves. And that's what they'll be experiencing. So with that being said, how do you best respond to this? It depends what you want the outcome to be, right? So if you're trying to just engage to have like a friendship because it's over and you're trying to move on, then I would almost try to just take space a little bit or just communicate on like a healthy surface sort of level. If when there's hostility, yeah, that could be dismissive avoidant as well, actually. So when if you're trying to re-engage in the relationship, then for the next like 3 weeks, okay, so if you're trying to re-engage in the relationship, number one, please make sure that the dynamics are healthy and that it's right for you and fair to you. If you're just engaging in the relationship to get rid of the pain or things like that, then then you're not doing yourself any service, right? So take a moment and truly evaluate, is this the right relationship for me? Is this the right person? Is this person healthy? Are they showing up well? Like, do that side of the work. And then once you've done that part of the work, then you can ask yourself, okay, if I want to engage the person, really, if they're dismissive avoidant, you want to put them in like a really comfortable space for like 3 weeks, 4 weeks. Just show up, be consistent, kind, sort of like surface level for a little bit. And then around the 3-4 week mark, if you start to see a little bit more warmth, then you can start to become a little bit closer. Sometimes the anxiously attached individuals, you can struggle a little bit with like the patience part of things, which is the hardest part of this when you're out of the relationship, I find, for anxious and dismissives. So what you want to do is really exercise patience for like 3 or 4 weeks until you start to see a closeness developing and see that they feel safe. And then you can say, let's grab a coffee, or let's whatever it is that's then bringing you into a space where you can re-engage in that romantic component. But move slowly. So slowly is very important. I'm just reading Summer's. We semi-reconciled 6 weeks later. He never again opened his heart up. He saw me exclusively but casually. Does the DA ever trust again? Dismissive wouldn't trust again, but they just take a very long time to open up. Summer, I can tell you're doing like super work because you're answering all these questions with the advice. It's good. So yeah, I mean, the dismissive one does trust again, but it's not really trust that they're struggling with, it's vulnerability. I guess you could say they don't trust that vulnerability is okay, but it's less so that they're like, oh, I don't trust you, you're gonna do something awful. It's more so like, I do not feel safe being vulnerable. So I would look at from the dismissive avoidant perspective that the most important thing to do is create safety in the relationship and consistency. And then you can slowly help this person peel back the layers a little bit. You can slowly ask deeper and deeper questions, and you can become more vulnerable and share things. And they really appreciate you sharing things from like an analytical, logical point of view. And the more you're doing that, the better. I hope that makes sense. So instead of saying like, you don't open up enough, what's wrong with you? Things like that. You might say, this is why opening up is important, and give them some facts. And then, help them peel back a layer and ask some deeper questions. And, you can have connection habits with a dismissive avoidant partner too. Hey, can we, chat for 10, 15 minutes in the morning and 10, 15 minutes in the evening if you live together, or on the phone, or whatever it might be, but have some kind of like healthy connection habits. Okay. Let's see. I think I answered all those questions. Hi, Tony. How's it going? Hi, CJ. And Rebecca. And Pedro. I don't know if I think I said hi to you. Interesting. Anna, you said I got back together with my partner. I feel like I went back to the same reaction. What was the reaction itself? Was it anxiety? That's really important if you let me know, I can answer that question a little bit better. Is the best way to heal by yourself? Yeah, by yourself first. But honestly, when you go back into the relationship, it'll just prepare you. Think of it as like you can learn about a sport, and you can, like, let's say you're trying to learn about soccer. You can practice kicking a ball around, and you can practice like doing like keep ups and juggling the ball, and you can practice like shooting the ball, and you can practice doing all these things. And then when you actually go into a game and it's like high level competition and it's intense, it's going to be a different experience. But that's where you have to apply the tools. The most important work that you'll do for reprogramming is reprogramming yourself when you feel triggered in real time. I hope that makes sense. I feel like I've been looking to attach my entire life, as I never attached to either parent. Okay, I was having a conversation with somebody not that long ago, and he was saying to me that when let me think of exactly how this went. He was saying, because it's like this, and it's a really, really important thing. He's anxiously attached, and he was saying to me that when he feels sad or feels like his girlfriend is like sort of pulling away, he gets this like really intense need. And it sounds funny, but he said, it's almost like I need my mother. Like, I feel like I need my parents. And this man's like in his like 30s, late 30s, like, it's not this. So there's this childlike aspect that comes up whenever we revert to like a childlike feeling, or you feel like you're a child and you're feeling kind of helpless or something like that. It's a signpost of trauma. It's usually a sign that your psyche got sort of frozen in time around something that it couldn't properly emotionally process. And so what you want to do with that is you want to make sure that you isolate and identify what that is, what the need is, and then you give that need to yourself like crazy. So for this one individual, the need was to feel validated, to feel seen, to feel told that like he was good, he wasn't doing anything wrong, everything was going to be okay. He to be encouraged, like, look, these are the things that are going well in your life, and he had that so missing from an aspect of his life because he sort of hadn't really attached to parents like that. And so part of his healing journey, and it had a massive impact on him in a really short period of time, was to begin to give that to himself. And so I highly recommend, that's one of the most important things you guys can do for anxious attachment. Okay. Akeisha. Hi, Akeisha. Hi, Thais. I find it hard to reconnect with my DA boyfriend after a conflict because I have a hard time letting it go. What's the best way of working through my emotions after a conflict? And what's the best? Okay, this is a great question. So, have you guys ever noticed, as anxiously attached individuals, that you really tend to warm up faster than your partner after a conflict, right? Like, it's like a conflict happens, it's over, and especially if you have a dismissive avoidant partner, it'll feel like the conflict happens, it's painful, it really hurts, and then maybe 5 minutes later, you're like, I don't want to fight, and I want to go and work this out. And then the dismissive avoidant partner, sometimes they have a 3-day bounce back rate, 4-day bounce back rate even after a conflict. So have you ever, I'm sure you guys have heard, like, dismissive avoidants are slow to warm up. And so when this happens, right, they're trying to take space, and what they're actually trying to take that space for is to self-soothe, because that's how they're used to coping with things. So they're waiting to sort of muddle through their own emotions. And then the anxiously attached individual is trying to soothe through their partner. So you have this argument or a conflict, and it's like probably the hardest dynamic you could be in, because it's going to feel like one of you is not getting your needs met. So whenever we have conflicting needs, one of the most important things you can do is ask yourself why. Okay, what is the why behind the need? So let's look at two really conflicting needs that we see in dismissive and anxious attachment. We'll sometimes see it's like one partner needs space, the other partner needs time. And so what do you do about that, right? Like, one person needs to be closer, the other person needs to be further. Well, ask yourself why. As the anxiously attached individual, why do you need time together? Why do you need more closeness? As a dismissive avoidant, why do you need space? And when you look at the sponsoring need behind, the sponsoring intention behind the need, these things are no longer in conflict. So now one person needs space and the other person needs time. Well, it's actually about, maybe you need time as the anxiously attached individual to feel like there is closeness between you. Maybe you need space as the dismissive avoidant, because you need to feel like you have your autonomy and to feel like you can do your own thing and you have your freedom. And so now, if the time together represented feeling emotionally bonded and close, create habits in your relationship where you have better quality time instead of quantity of time. Or if the time was to feel validated and safe, ask for validation through words of affirmation or through whatever your love language is in the relationship. And then create a dynamic where you can say to your partner, hey, I'm willing to make an exchange here, where if you can give me more of this validation, I am happy to respect some of your freedom. And also, when you're having these conversations, I'm kind of going off on a tangent now, but when you're having these conversations, make sure as well as you're having these conversations that you're transparently communicating your needs. Because sometimes I've seen couples in the past a few times, many times actually, where like the anxiously attached individual is afraid of losing their partner. So instead of saying, my ideal amount of time spent together is 5 days a week, instead they say, my ideal amount of time together is 2 days a week. And they're trying to sort of get closer to what they think their dismissive avoidant partner will want, so that their answer for this question doesn't seem unacceptable. And then the anxiously attached person says, let's say 3 days a week, when really they mean 5. The dismissive avoidant says 1 day a week. And then you meet between 1 and 3. And so now you're at 2 days a week and your needs are still not fulfilled. And you're sort of in these breeding grounds waiting for anxiety to happen. So just a couple key points there. So to finish answering this question from Akisha, you said, I have a hard time letting it go. We are not supposed to let conflict go. If anybody tells you just let it go, it's bad advice. Conflict does not get let go of. It gets repressed. Okay. What we are supposed to do is we are supposed to feel the feelings. It doesn't feel good. It's easier many times over to just repress, right? And just to not allow yourself to feel anything and just, ignore what you're feeling and distract yourself or do whatever. It doesn't serve you. Okay. That stuff gets stored into your subconscious mind when it gets pushed down. And then you develop all these weird coping mechanisms and habits to try to avoid your emotions. It's a gift that you guys are feelers in here, right? Use that. So we're supposed to feel all the emotions, sit with our emotions, experience them, ask them like what they're telling us. What painful stories are we running right now? What are the deeply unmet needs? What are the parts of ourselves that are hurting right now that we need to reparent? Get clear on these things. Use that conflict as an opportunity to heal those wounded subconscious aspects and to integrate those unmet needs and use that as a tool to self-soothe. And then you can return to reconnecting after the conflict, because you'll be doing so from a place of not trying to get your needs met through a person who's not able to offer them to you at the time. And one other thing I would say is just in this conflict, one person wants space after a conflict and you want to reconnect after the conflict. Look for the underlying needs in this exact situation. Maybe you want to know, Akisha, that your partner's not going to leave you, and maybe he wants his space to soothe, and you can say, listen, I know we've just had a conflict. I'm ready to work it out. I know you may not be at this moment or in this time, but I am happy to respect your space, and I'll be able to if you can just validate that everything's going to be okay in the end, and that this isn't going to, you're not on your way out the door right now. And then I can respect that you need that space. So you can make these exchanges if you're clear about what your needs are. Okay. And it's actually a really important thing to do. I've had many couples over the years work on that specifically. So they're going like literally, let's say it's a dismissive avoidant male. He says to his wife, like, hey, I know you're anxious right now. I know you're feeling afraid. I really need this space. Remember, I'm just soothing. I just need to take the time here for myself. I'm going to ask you to respect it. And I'm just letting you know we're going to be okay. We'll work through this. I do love you. I'm not leaving. Things like this. And obviously you have to have a willing and able to participate partner. But a lot of dismissive avoidants are willing and able to do this. And if they're not, then we're looking at, okay, maybe this is not the right relationship, right? So these are really important sort of signposts along the way. And then once the anxiously attached individual hears that from their partner, now it's like, whew, okay, I can relax a little bit, right? And that sort of helps to protect that person's space. So they work together as long as you're able to consciously create these healthy exchanges. So Jermaine says, what is a good way to self-soothe when the person you're around is totally silent? When I'm with anyone and they aren't talking, it automatically triggers the feeling that I did something. It's a great question. It continues. Did something wrong, or that they are upset with me, even if nothing has happened. Then, of course, I'll get on the defensive and give them the silent treatment right back. That's kind of fearful avoidant of you, Jermaine. You're definitely on the anxious side of fearful avoidant. So because you're pulling back, right? You're as opposed to continuously coming forward. So the answer to this question is, number one, question your story. Can you 100% know that you did something wrong? Number two, ask for clarification. You're allowed to ask somebody, hey, I noticed that there's a break in this pattern, or I noticed that something changed and you're a little bit quiet. What do you need? Do you need a little bit of space right now? Or is there something wrong? And you can ask that. That's okay. It's healthy to have these conversations where, I was saying to somebody fairly recently that when we look at like what constitutes as a secure person and what created a secure attachment style in the first place, what created a secure attachment style is that when a child was born, when the child would cry, the caregiver would come and connect to the child and acknowledge their feelings. When the child would be hungry, and cry for that reason, the caregiver was there at least consistently enough to meet their needs. So what the child's messaging is and what the inferences are that they collect and gather are that, hey, my feelings are worthy of being acknowledged and seen and communicated, and it works, and my needs are worthy of being met. And from that develops a healthy sense of self-esteem and a healthy capacity to treat others in the same way. And so the feelings and needs are able to be expressed. There's trust because there's enough consistency in the child-caregiver relationship dynamic. And so these are some of the early markers for what creates a secure attachment style. And so we want to imagine, you can ask yourself the question, what would a securely attached individual do in this situation? And most often, even though you might think, I just have to work out my feelings on my own, work out your feelings on your own first, go have a conversation and express second. And the idea here is that you're doing both, okay? And in doing both, you're creating secure dynamics in the relationship. It's normal to have problems. It's normal to have challenges you have to work out. You take two different human beings with totally separate sets of programming and beliefs and attachment patterns and expectations and love languages and all these different things. You're going to have these run-ins, and it's about not personalizing them, working through any personalization or meaning you give to something, right? Your partner didn't meet that need, and you make it mean that you're unworthy of love. Ouch, work through that. That's not going to help the relationship. That's going to hurt you a lot and hurt the relationship. So you work through that and you come in and then you say, hey, I needed this thing. And you express your feelings and you make them worthy and okay of being heard, being acknowledged, and the needs being communicated. And there will be times where somebody's not available to meet your needs, and that's okay too. And then your job is to not personalize that and turn it into a story either. To see the need through when you can, to be consistent. But if for whatever reason, it's like a gentle reason, let's say it's your partner can't meet your need because they are really struggling with something at work and you need some support, but they have a deadline and they'll get fired if they can't support, they can't meet it or whatever it is. There's going to be times where life happens, and then we want to be fully empowered and capable of identifying our needs and meeting those needs for ourselves as well. Okay. And that's the ideal for how to get over to a healthy relationship. Hi, Ellie. I'm happy you're here. Good to see you. So Anna says, how to deal with too much jealousy. I feel other people are taking too much of my partner's time and feel threatened that I might lose him. Okay, so jealousy is a really tough thing for people to go through. So underneath jealousy, there's always a lot of fear or insecurity. So there's a lot of fear-based or insecure stories. And there's a lot of painful expectations, okay? So number one, I would start with the expectations. This is actually a great question. Number one, can you guys all see? For some reason, it says at the bottom, it can't connect to chat. Can you guys just write hello if you can still speak? I just want to make sure I can get the questions. I'm just going to try typing something in the chat here. Okay, I hope everything's good. It still shows that there's people on here. Okay, good. So the next question, I wonder why I can't connect to the chat though. Okay, interesting. I hope that everything's okay. I'm just going to keep chatting here. So about jealousy. So at first, you want to get really clear about what your expectations are from a relationship, because usually when there's excessive jealousy, there's this excessive subconscious belief in codependency. And it's not your fault. It's not because you're like, yay, I want codependency at a conscious level, but usually you had some kind of enmeshment or some kind of expectation sort of like given to you for what a relationship should look like. This can even be like coming from movies or television or, these romantic fairy tale stories that we get or things like that. But what happens is you have these expectations, and the expectations might be things like, I'm supposed to be with my partner all this time, and when he has other people around, it's taking the time from me. And, so codependency is sort of this underlying enmeshment, right? It's this idea that we should meet all each other's needs only. Nobody outside of the relationship should meet my partner's needs. We should spend the majority of our time together all the time. They should always be putting me first. Nothing should ever be prioritized as second. And while it's really good to have like healthy priorities and to prioritize the relationship, when it's sort of in this black and white space, that can be when it's not very healthy, right? That can be when it becomes like a little bit, I don't want to say dangerous, but definitely not healthy. Okay. So what do we do with that? Well, what we want to make sure that we do is we want to make sure that we question the expectations that we have, and we develop conscious expectations for what we think the relationship should be or should look like. So for example, you can sit down and you can write, Anna, you could write, okay, how often do I actually think that I should be with this partner? For a relationship to last and be in a healthy space, how often should we be spending our time together? And how much will it be important that this person has a life outside of just this relationship? And when we try to sort of make the relationship our life and vice versa, even though you can get in that space where there's like this high and there's all this love and there's all this oxytocin, the bonding neurochemical, and there's all this stuff going on, long term, those are usually the relationships that I do not see lasting after the honeymoon phase ends, because our habits are so unhealthy for a period of time that then when we start to revert, like when the honeymoon phase ends and we've had this spike in all of our neurochemicals and it kind of calms down, then what happens is we get into this space where it's like, oh my gosh, I like don't know how to operate from this neurochemical deficit, and it's difficult for me to have healthy, normalized habits and patterns of behavior. And so if that's the case, then there's going to be a lot of challenges post honeymoon phase. So you don't want to set yourself up for that. So I would go through, this is actually a great exercise for everybody to do right now. I would go through the 7 areas of life. Okay. So career, financial, mental, emotional, spiritual, physical, relationships. And you can write relationships under sort of 3 categories: friends, family, romance. Okay. And I would write in there, and I'll slow down so you guys can do this. I would write in there what you would expect for your partner to do in each of those areas. What are your expectations about how your partner should react in each of these areas, held next to you, held next to how much attention they should give you? Okay. And so this is a great thing to do if you're struggling with jealousy at all. And take a look. Do you think, this person should never do, and let's say you live together with a person, you might have an expectation that says, when my husband or my wife comes home from work, that time is exclusively for the relationship, and they should never bring work home or never do work at home. And then take a look at your partner and look at them not through the perspective of who you are and what you want, but look at them through their individual set of their individual set of needs, traits, personality. Because when we love truly, we love and respect this person for the qualities that they bring to the table. We can ask for change. We can ask for them to meet our needs. We can ask for compromise in the places we have different needs. But when we're trying to change who they are at their core, like let's say you have a very career-driven husband or wife, and you have this expectation that says, when they come home, they cannot bring work home. That's time to be present, and that's it. I would question some of those things. Are those going to make those tools, are they going to make for a healthy long-term relationship dynamic? Or is that something that could really cause chaos at some point in life, because you're asking that person to repress a fundamental part of who they are if they're very career-driven, for example? And then a really great place to look at this also is with friendships, right? I see a lot of individuals over the years who have gone through, I think of so many stories, but who they have an anxious partner, and their partner says, listen, I don't want you to really see your friends as much. We have to spend more quality time once we have kids, once we have the family. And while it's important to prioritize the family and the kids, it's also important to balance all 7 areas of our life as much as possible, because these are going to create these breeding grounds for resentment later. And then that's when there's going to be things that trigger the anxiously attached individual and their style, right? Because then this person's maybe trying to see friends behind your back, or maybe it's going to, wherever there's a space we have to repress things, usually these things come out in other ways that are less healthy. So we always want to intend to have the conscious conversations Bring everything to the table. Look at our expectations. Look at their expectations. Your partner. Maybe your partner's expectations are, I can do whatever I want when I want. And yet you just had twins, and that's not going to work out like that, right? Like, there has to be more of a priority put on the family. But what's important is that both expectations are conscious, they're surfaced, they're brought to the table. And then you can start working through these different dynamics and finding where a nice, healthy balance and compromise is. And I like to think that there's always a healthy balance and compromise for both partners in a romantic relationship. It's just that sometimes it takes a little while to iron out the kinks and to properly get there. Sometimes that compromise isn't something that happens like this. Sometimes that compromise is something that happens because we had the conversations. We worked out those kinks. We had the conversations again. I think of like any of you guys who have ever started at a new job, or for myself, whenever I've started a new project, like I started the online version of the personal development school. And when I did the online version, I had a business partner this time around who's amazing. And you guys will see some of him at some point as well. But it was like, I make a plan and then I replan that plan. And then a couple weeks later, I have to redesign the plan again. And then a month later, new things have changed and I have to add to the plan and change the plan again. And a relationship will always be like that. It'll be, you move down a track, you're on a trajectory, and then you're like, hold on, we have to work out all these invisible walls that exist between us because we still have different sets of needs and expectations in this area, in that area. And what you want to keep doing is keep bringing those things back to the table, keep bringing these conversations to the surface, and then keep working out those little places where you're going to have to create conscious compromises. Okay, so your needs want to be surfaced. And I recommend when you go through the 7 areas of life, doing this with your partner. If you're in a romantic relationship right now, go through career, financial, mental, emotional, etc., and ask, what is important to you in these areas? What are your expectations in these areas? Have these conscious conversations so you can compare notes and create conscious compromises that are from your conscious mind. Anything that you don't work out ahead of time this way will just come up as an obstacle later, and that's okay too. You can work through those obstacles, but you can make relationships in life a lot easier on yourself by doing this work ahead of time, right? And it creates this much less of a likelihood that you're going to be triggered as much when something happens. Because if you're anxious and your partner decides, hey, I'm taking this promotion and I'm going to be working, 20 extra hours a week, just wanted to let you know, then that's going to be, it might be a little bit triggering. You might feel like there's this distance or this separation, versus if ahead of time you knew that your partner, if an opportunity came, wanted to advance their career in an area and that they were going to be working extra. And then you said ahead of time, hey, if this ever happens, can you work to be a little bit extra validating and reinforcing and show up well in this area for me? Because that might be something challenging for me to deal with, as my expectations are a little bit different. I would always prioritize relationships ahead of career. Then once you have these conversations ahead of time, you don't hear that, hey, I'm going to be working 20 hours extra a week in the moment, and then have all this room for stories and fears and triggers, because you've already planned out these things and you've had these conversations when they're not happening from a triggered space, right? So the more you can do here, the better. And if you don't have a partner, put your expectations out in that area and sit with those things, have them available, aware, so that you can bring them into a relationship. Or if you have a partner who you think is unwilling to do this work with you, and that they don't want to tell you their expectations, or they're not trying to have these conscious conversations, write down what you think they are. But again, if you have a partner who's not willing to do any work on the relationship, it's not necessarily a good sign. So we want to just be mindful about that. Okay. So I hope that is helpful so far. The next thing I have here, Nellie's saying, Thais, based on what you said today, would you recommend an AA practice, talking to themselves and trusting their own advice first for soothing before they bring the issue to another person? Absolutely. And I think this is in the anxious attachment course, but I would do this for a period of time. Like, I would commit. It's a great, you said afterwards, LOL, never mind. You just answered my question. Absolutely, though. Just to reiterate that, I think it is so important to do that. Like, practice getting your own advice, trusting yourself, building that self-trusting relationship to you, learning about your own decisions, your feelings, your intuition, and moving from there. And I'm going to answer these other couple of questions, but some things that the anxiously attached individual, the anxious preoccupied individual can work on that are so important. And I've said this in a couple of different places, but like, you really want to make sure that you're building a relationship to your own feelings and needs so that you know what they are in real time. So many anxiously attached individuals will be in the habit of like abandoning their feelings, abandoning their needs, and in order to gain approval, gain favor, gain connection with somebody else. And the really painful part of this is that you lose the relationship to yourself in doing that. And then the more I lose the relationship to myself, if I'm anxiously attached, the more I crave or yearn for other people outside of me to meet my need. And the more, and it becomes a spiral, right? There's one of my favorite books ever is called The Mastery of Love by Don Miguel Ruiz. It's such a beautiful book. It's a really easy read, but it was like a really powerful read for me at a really important part of my life. And there's this analogy in there that talks about the magical kitchen. And the magical kitchen talks about, it's sort of, I won't go into it for too long, but the idea is that if you can imagine you have this magical kitchen and you have all the food you could ever need, and somebody knocks at your door and says, hey, I have a pizza. But for you to have a piece of my pizza, you have to do all these things for me. And it comes with all these rules and stipulations, and you owe me. And you're going to be like, no, I have a magical kitchen that produces all the pizza I need. I don't need your pizza with your rules and stipulation, but thank you. And, but then if you hold that next to, you juxtapose that to somebody in a situation where you are starving and you have no food, and somebody comes and knocks at your door and says, hey, I have a pizza and you have to do all these things for me to have a bite, you're going to be like, I'll do anything because I'm starving. And that analogy is like in relationship to the way we love ourselves. When we're out of relationship with ourselves, when we're out of relationship with our own feelings, our needs, because we're so externally focused on society or career or expectations or approval or whatever battle or challenges going on in our lives, then we lose connection to ourselves. And then when connection comes in from outside of us, it's so enticing. It's like smelling a pizza when you haven't eaten in 4 days, right? Like, it has so much power over us. And the more power a connection outside of you feels like it has over you, not like love, not openness, excitement, beauty, but that feeling of, whoa, my feelings are so strong, I don't really feel in control, almost like intoxication. The more strong that is, it is usually, not always, but usually a symptom of being that out of relationship to yourself. And so when somebody comes along that can meet those needs, that can give you those things, it's like, oh my gosh, I'll do anything. And that's where you really want to buckle down and get clear on what your feelings and your needs are. And give yourself some of that love and that connection, and spend intentional time with yourself. Another thing too is like, spend active time with yourself. Don't spend passive time with yourself where you're just, on your phone, on social media, trying to avoid yourself while you're doing things. Create time where you take yourself to lunch or take yourself to coffee or sit with yourself, be with yourself, get to know yourself in just your energy, your feelings, like what comes up for you, just how you tend to, like, what your operating emotional state is throughout your day. Like, get familiar with all these things. And again, like in the anxiously attached, in the anxious preoccupied course, there's a lot of emphasis in there in the self-connection questions, because the more you are intentionally connecting with yourself, asking yourself self-connection questions, checking in, where I'm at with my life, reflecting, introspecting, the more you're doing that, the more you're giving yourself food from your own magical kitchen, if that makes sense. And have you ever thought of, like, when you love or you fall in love, and this might sound sort of silly and cheesy, but I like this idea. When you fall in love, where does that love come from? Like, you don't fall in love and that love that you feel for somebody comes from outside of you. That love is being produced inside. Those feelings are yours. Your brain, your mind, your heart, your spirit, whatever it is for you, you have the capacity to produce all of that love, right? So you don't have to feel lonely your whole life and then all of a sudden somebody comes in and now you have permission to feel these feelings. You can feel those things for so many different people in your life, but you can also feel those feelings and initiate and intentionalize those feelings for yourself through connecting, and to come from that space of acceptance and kindness and gentleness towards yourself is going to be one of the most important things from a reparenting perspective as well. Okay, so I'm going to answer these last couple of questions. I don't know why the chat shut off. Let me just see. It's okay though, because I wouldn't have gotten through all these questions anyways. All messages. Let me see if that makes any difference. I had the wrong chat selected. Hi. Oh my gosh, there's all these beautiful people on here. Oh my gosh. Okay, so I could only see the top chat for some reason. Okay, so anyways, what I'm going to do, I'm going to answer a couple more questions that are on here because I only would have gotten this far anyways. And then you guys are so sweet. You're all chatting with each other. I had top chat, whatever that is. It changed partway through. I must have clicked something by accident instead of live chat. So I'm sorry if I didn't say hi to some of you guys who were in here and they weren't showing up for me, some of the comments. So what I'll do is we're going to do another anxious attachment webinar anyways. So I'm doing another dismissive avoidant this Saturday because everybody requested this. And because there's so much engagement here too with so many questions, I'm going to do another anxious one. And I'll copy and paste all the questions. Ellie, yeah, if all the men you're attracted to are always dismissive avoidant, that tells you a lot. That tells you a lot about some of the experience. That means there's a lot of Okay. One other thing in here, I'm going to do a whole course on this in shadow work. This is one of my favorite tools ever. It's so underrated. It's like absolutely stunning and beautiful. I don't know who in here is familiar with shadow work, but shadow work is essentially that everybody is mirroring something to you. And it's either going to be something you're doing to yourself, something you're also doing to the person you're judging in that moment, or something you're doing to somebody else in your life. And all the things that we take personally and that trigger us, it's because there is some kind of personal piece there. Anything we're taking personally outside of us, it's because it's personal to us on the inside in some form. So, for example, Ellie, when you're saying all the men that you are always attracted to are dismissive avoidance, I would ask you, like, where are you dismissive avoidant to yourself? Okay? Because usually when there's somebody we're attracted to who's this dismissive avoidant attachment style, it's because we are carrying some of those qualities in how we treat ourselves. And so our subconscious mind still seeks this out as a comfort zone for what love is. Okay? So really important to note in there. I'm going to go through another couple of these questions, but I also am going to copy and paste them, and I'm going to start the ones that I've missed off in the next seminar. I just want to see what Rebecca said. I'm going to just read some of these other comments. Hi, Rebecca and Tara. Healthy people are able to self-soothe. Yes, exactly. Hi, Marcelo. And Manu, good to see you. I feel like I'm attracted to DAs because I enjoy the space too. There you go. I may not be comfortable with closeness either due to childhood trauma. Usually this is what's happening at a deep level, you know. Like I was speaking to somebody who's anxiously attached a little while ago, and she's been married to her husband for a little while, and he's very dismissive avoidant. And she said, the more I learn about myself through this process, so she was a client, and she said to me, the more I'm learning about myself through this process, the more I'm actually realizing that because he's avoidant, it makes me feel safe because I had overbearing parents who were like always in my business and in my space and kind of controlling. And so I actually realized that he makes me feel safe on some level because he gives me that space. And so even though it triggers this other aspect of me, at some level, it's almost like I like that he's like that. And usually when you dig deep enough, you'll find that there's something in there that is a little bit comfortable or something that you're avoiding, some level of intimacy that you're avoiding. And for all anxiously attached individuals, that intimacy starts within yourself. Okay, if you haven't built, I can't say this enough. I know I'm saying the same message in different forms. If you haven't built some form of intimacy with yourself, you're going to struggle with it in external relationships. Okay. And I feel like I do not need space though. I can spend, yes, yes. I know, I understand. It can be when there's probably some codependency in your patterning from how you were in your your relationship with your parents, something like that, Anna. When you say, I feel like I can spend all my time with my partner 24/7, do I really need the need of having space? It's yes. And what that tells you is that you're probably out of relationship to yourself, and you want to practice building that relationship back to yourself in order to create those healthy dynamics, so that you appreciate your alone time a little bit. Otherwise, it's like an addiction. You'll want and you'll want, and you might be addicted to the oxytocin that's being produced, the bonding neurochemical, the dopamine, the serotonin, all these neurochemicals can be there. But then when your partner goes away or there's a fear of losing him, the feelings are going to become so strong because you're so dependent on him at an emotional and maybe even neurochemical level. And that's where we have the breeding grounds for so much jealousy, anger, fear. And when we come from a fear-based place, that bleeds into the relationship in many unhealthy and often toxic ways long term. So even though you're not having those problems yet, or I guess you're having a little bit of the jealousy already, it's so important to create a little bit of healthy habits. And the idea is not to feel like we're always on this high in a relationship. The idea is to feel like we are healthy, we're balanced, the relationship feels good, we love wholly and fully, we trust. That's the space that we want to get into for the relationship to last. Because otherwise, when the honeymoon phase short circuits, there's gonna be a lot more challenges. And I agree, Manu. That's a great answer. Ellie says, okay, I'll stick around here for a little longer. Because the chat's back on. So if you guys are okay for a little bit, I know I always say like 1 hour webinars and then I'm here for a long time, but I'll answer some of these questions more. And then anything that doesn't get answered is important. So Daniel, you probably haven't taken the attachment style courses yet, but somebody who's anxiously attached, they usually like keep hungering for emotional closeness in the bond. And they usually have a fear of being left or abandoned, or pulled away. And the dismissive avoidant usually needs a lot of space, a lot of time, a lot of independence. They're a little bit slow to warm up, emotionally closed off. Sometimes they come across as being like aloof or cold or passive aggressive. It's much easier to recognize generally in men than women, but you're going to be a fearful avoidant, Daniel. And your partner, I don't know. I have to sort of know a little bit more, but I would highly recommend if you go on the course website, you can just go on, there's like in the very first part of each of the attachment style courses, there's like a one pager and it summarizes a lot of the key qualities if you're not as familiar with attachment style. So you can print that off or you can just take a look at it and it'll give you all of the qualities and that will help you to like really clearly recognize. So I hope that makes sense. You guys are so sweet in here, like encouraging each other and supporting each other. So Ellie says, is there a pattern you see with anxiously attached individuals not liking anyone? It's so rare for me to find somebody I really want to be with, even though I feel like I give people a solid chance. The guys I always want to be with are dismissive avoidant. You know what? It is actually a little bit rare. Usually I find that dismissive avoidants get feelings very easily. And that those feelings are usually like moving around a lot and like very strong. And so what I would suggest here is that you write out your beliefs, Ellie, about liking somebody. It's actually a good sign that you're moving towards more of a secure attachment style, that you're not just getting all these emotions and feelings all over. It's usually saying that, hey, you're meeting some of your own needs. So I wonder, like, has that been happening since you've been on more of a personal growth journey? Usually we get feelings for people as anxiously attached individuals, you guys. Usually you'll get feelings for people the more you have unmet needs in your own life, either with yourself or the people in your surrounding environment, and you're not allowing yourself to recognize those needs. And so your subconscious will find those things through other people because it's literally there to bring you back to balance. And so you can think of a lot of those things as feedback mechanisms, if anything, as opposed to actual experiences. Sometimes it's like a little bit of both, but it's an important thing to note. So Ellie, because you're in that space, what that's usually going to tell you is that either you're starting to get into a really healthy relationship to yourself, or you have some kind of like interesting story in your subconscious mind that's acting as a block or a barrier. Maybe you find yourself having like really high expectations or standards or something like that, which might not be a bad thing at all. But I would just write out any stories that exist there. It's an interesting topic. You're welcome, Summer. No problem. And Rebecca says, I'm learning with my fearful avoidant boyfriend. I'm learning why my fearful avoidant boyfriend triggers my anxious behaviors, but can't understand where that anxious vigilance was when I was married to a covert narcissist. Okay, great question. I have an answer for you. I'll finish reading the rest of your question. It's like I was dead and numb at the end of a 25-year marriage. This anxious feeling is like the extreme opposite. I'm almost scared to lose it, although the anxiety is too much. So 2 things can happen when you're with a narcissist, especially a covert narcissist. Number 1, if you're in pain for a long enough period of time, you'll shut down because you're trying to shut down and keep your emotions like repressed and your feelings repressed, as you almost become like the avoidant part of yourself. And if somebody's poking and poking and poking and triggering and triggering and triggering, especially because you said 25 years, usually what I see with women who are in a narcissistic marriage, usually I see that the woman becomes like almost exactly like what you're describing, just numb, like totally numb. And it's sort of like they get confused, they lose their sense of self, and then they can't really find or regain that sense of self, or they feel like they can't leave and they don't have direction. And so they just numb themselves as a coping mechanism. And then over time, it feels like you almost become the dismissive avoidant of that relationship because you've turned everything off so hard. You've repressed everything so much. Okay. So now what happens after that is that some of that trauma can be stored in your subconscious and it can express itself as anxiety later, right? If you're actually afraid of losing somebody, and maybe the narcissist, the covert narcissist, you weren't afraid of losing because they were hurting you so much, but you were afraid of leaving because of the repercussions or the things that could come out of it. And so what happens is some of that anxiety might have just been covered over with numbness over periods of time, or because the covert narcissist was so touch and go, so hot and cold, so like coming and going, what can also happen is that can actually, because the subconscious is programmed through repetition over time, what can happen is that can actually create this aspect of you that basically goes, oh my goodness, I can't predict anything. I might be abandoned, I might not. I might be abandoned, I might not. And that can create the dynamics of actually programming your subconscious at the time to become more anxiously attached. Yet you wouldn't have allowed yourself to fully feel it because you have the cover emotion of numbness. Okay. And numbness, that's what it is. It's a cover emotion for other underlying painful emotions. So it can be one of those 2 things or a combination of both. And your brain is probably also afraid because it's going, oh my gosh, this is a healthy relationship. This is a good relationship. And you have a fear of losing that. So I would recommend when the anxiety course comes out, do a lot of work with your amygdala-based anxiety, that like reactionary anxiety, because there's going to be a lot of painful programming in there. But do a lot of the, what is my worst case scenario, Rebecca? How would I be okay? How would I still be safe? How am I safe in my environment now? How am I safe in this relationship now? So all the pieces of you that are feeling unsafe, look to keep reinforcing to yourself that you're safe, because that's one of those foundational parts of the amygdala-based anxiety, that deeply programmed anxiety. Okay. Jody, hi Jody. As an anxiously attached individual, I don't want space, but I know I need space. Good for you. I definitely think that's something that keeps me in the trap, because he gives me what I need without realizing I need it. I like that insight. That's really cool. So what you're saying is that it actually is feeding an aspect of yourself, which keeps you there to a certain degree, because on one aspect, your subconscious needs are met. I agree with that very much. And my advice to you, even though I know that was just an insight, use that time wisely. So when you feel this, okay, and you feel like there's space and there's distance and you're like, oh no, and you want to react, just use that time wisely. Be like, you know what? My dismissive avoidant partner is pulling back. And this is a great opportunity for me to connect to myself. And when you start to build positive emotional associations to that space, you're going to start feeling significantly better, because you'll start actually feeling like it's healthy and safe to have that space. And then you're capitalizing on those opportunities, right? And you're repatterning those aspects within yourself. Usually it's a really beautiful thing when we were talking about shadow work earlier to be able to go, okay, what am I judging my partner as? Oh, my partner's not being very loving right now. Where am I not being loving to myself recently? Or, oh, my partner's being distant right now. Where have I been distant to myself recently? And you'll find a lot of this time that there's a beautiful sort of mirroring event happening. And part of the reason it's triggering you so much that somebody's pulling back is because you've just been treating yourself that way and they're almost reinforcing it. So you're coming from an emotional space of it's like the straw that broke the camel's back. You've been distant from yourself. You've been unloving or unkind towards yourself for a while. And now somebody mirrors that to you, and that's why it causes so much pain. Ellie says, I've recently experienced calming down my anxiety when triggered just by noticing what's happening and questioning my thoughts and core wounds. That is amazing. That was my favorite part of my healing journey, was doing that work and feeling like, oh my gosh, I can just use my conscious mind to question all these thoughts and create that separation and work through those core wounds. And what you will seriously see, Ellie, that's so amazing, is that over time, those really painful triggering things stop coming back as much. And eventually you'll feel like when they do come back, if they ever do, they're like a 2 out of 10 or a 3 out of 10. And you have emotional control over the situation because they're not all these residual painful moments of deep wounds. So beautiful. I'm so glad. Better than Xanax. That's amazing. Oh, you too, Rebecca. That's so exciting. I'm so happy to hear that, you guys. That was my favorite tool. It like makes me reminisce. I still do that work when stuff happens, but really, truly, I used to get emotionally triggered like 8 or 9 out of 10 on a regular basis, like multiple times throughout the day. And now if I do get triggered, I'm always like a little surprised at first, like, oh, what is this? So Linda, hi, Linda. My separation anxiety started with my dad when I was a little toddler, when he went away on a course for a few months in the Air Force. I used to cry every night and my mother couldn't soothe me. That's exactly the perfect context for a lot of anxious attachment, right? And so a lot of self-love, I see you say after, that's the best thing you can do. Everything that you wanted from your dad then, give to yourself now, okay? If it was comforting, if it was reinforcement, if it was some kind of deep connection, if it was just encouragement and positive words, if it was affection, like you can literally get in your bed and you can cuddle yourself in your covers and put on your comfiest clothes and socks and get a tea, and you can give yourself those like warming things that make you feel like physical affection. There's always a way. And your goal is to identify what those needs are specifically for you and keep meeting them within yourself. Okay. Hi, Alan. Nice to see you. I like your screen name. It looks like you might be a digital nomad, which is wonderful. Good. I'm so glad in the new that you're reparenting. That's beautiful. Nellie, I will do a video about reparenting. That will be my next video in a little more detail. I had like a really high level version once, but reparenting in essence, and again, like this is a big topic and it's a really important topic, so I don't want to do it too much of an injustice, but reparenting is essentially this. In those parts of you that feel wounded, childlike, a little bit emotional, more so than usual, and that intense feeling, in those spaces where you're feeling that way, ask yourself, what needs are deeply unmet in me right now? And how can I meet these needs myself? And there's a few angles you can take. Another great angle is to ask yourself, from my mother, what were the needs in me that were the most unmet in my childhood? How can I start meeting those needs myself? From my father, what were the needs that were most unmet? How can I start meeting those needs myself? From my siblings, from my grandparents, whoever you were around a lot in childhood, what were your deeply unmet needs? And then what are your conscious strategies to bring those needs into your life now? And what happens is literally, if you guys have ever felt that feeling of being like sort of childlike and like almost as if you like regress to a younger version of yourself in a way, maybe you're really triggered and you feel really needy and helpless and kind of small or young, or usually it's because there's these deep unmet needs that your subconscious mind is sort of hanging on to. And when that triggered state comes up over you in real time, you kind of feel like you're this child again. And those are the most profound times to reparent, to start identifying these needs and meeting them yourself. There's a whole bunch of other stuff to it. I want to say so much, but I'm going to put it in a video in a lot more detail. But there's something called implicit memory retrieval. And it's a way of like Also bringing up what those memories are related to. So if you have a really strong triggering event now, and you can ask yourself, okay, what are the feelings that I'm experiencing right now, and what's an early memory of experiencing similar feelings? Usually your subconscious will kind of spit out through association painful memories from the past where there are unresolved wounds. And then you can ask yourself a step further, wow, what did I need in this situation that I couldn't get outside of me? And then start giving those things to yourself in real time. And it's really powerful. It's a great way to reprogram and repattern, because reparenting creates such a strong emotional imprint, and our subconscious speaks more through emotion than anything else, than language, than anything. Ellie, until recently, I would always date guys that were crazy about me, even though I wasn't crazy about them, because they felt safe, and I would be cold towards the guys I really wanted, because I was so scared that once they really got to know me, they would reject me. Is that a normal AA thing to do? That's more, Ellie, I feel like you're a fearful avoidant, and you're experiencing the anxious side of fearful avoidance, because anxious individuals get feelings a lot more easily. Fearful avoidants don't a lot of the time. They can be a lot more sort of picky and careful and like take a little more time to warm up. And also, fearful avoidants avoid a lot of the time and feel like kind of hostility, or what was the word you used? I would be cold towards the people I really wanted. That's a very fearful avoidant thing to do. So I would definitely, a lot of fearful avoidants think they're anxiously attached first, and then come to discover that they have that avoidance side. So I am going to tell you that right now, and I would highly advise that you do a little research into that. And you might also just be a fearful avoidant that always dates dismissive avoidance. So you always feel like you're identifying more with the anxious side of the spectrum. But anxiously attached individuals do not have these deactivating strategies or needs to create space from people they want to connect with. It's just not really a thing. So good to keep in mind. Hi, Christy. When I am overstimulated, my amygdala anxiety is overwhelming. Too many people, food, music, strong smells, clutter. I feel like I have to escape or gain control. Is this part of anxious attachment or fearful avoidant hypervigilance? Great question. This is most something called HSP, if you've ever heard of it. It stands for highly sensitive person. And it's actually a genetic trait that's found. I remember trying to remember what it is, and it's on DDR axon 7L4 in the genome. And it's like a scientifically proven thing, and it's characterized by four main things. And I bet you're going to really relate to this, Christy. Depth of processing. So basically like seeing a lot of shifts and patterns of behavior and then giving them a lot of meaning quite easily. So basically high levels of storytelling. We could put it that way, but it's called depth of processing. Extremely sensitive to your environment. Okay, so music, sounds, smells, spatial awareness, all these sorts of things. Highly emotional, highly analytical. And research shows, there's a really good TED talk about it actually, and research shows it affects, I think it's 10 to 15% of the population. And is also associated with like higher levels of creativity, higher levels of sensitivity in general, obviously. But there's some really interesting research around it. Being an outside of the box thinker a lot, kind of feeling like a bit of aversion towards authority, not loving rules, more feeling like you have your internal set of morals and guidelines that you feel more pulled towards, and not really understanding rules. And a lot of people are HSPs. I'm definitely one myself. And I'm very sensitive to lots of things. So that's what brought me to this work, I think, in the first place. So I would say that that's much more. Now, the amygdala anxiety being overwhelming, from that space, remember to repattern and just keep telling yourself, I'm safe, and look for all the reasons you are completely safe. And then look for where you can find control, okay? If you feel like there's a lack of control, look for where I am in control. I can move, I can get up, I can go home, I can leave, and look for all those sort of like positively reinforcing patterns that way. Hi, Gemma. That's beautiful to hear. Thank you. I'm so glad. I love Summer. You keep giving great answers. in here. It's wonderful. Gemma, hi Thais, your material and courses have helped me tremendously as an anxiously attached. I've read the book Attached. Are there any other books you would recommend? I'm writing a book right now, and it'll be released in January, I believe. So that will be really helpful, I hope. To be honest, I haven't read a lot of attachment style books, to be honest. I took a course in it once, and I realized a lot of patterns between like core wounds and different things like that, and subconscious patterns, because I was working on a lot of the core wounds and emotional mastery stuff, and I was able to find a lot of correlations between attachment style and core wounds and needs, and so I don't even know if I've actually read a single attachment book, but I've heard wonderful things about the book Attached, really consistently. I'm trying to think of I hear really positive things about a man named Stan Tatkin. I hear that a lot in my seminars. I haven't had a chance to look him up, so I just want to recommend him with a grain of salt, because it's not from me, it's from other people around me. I think his name is Stantaktin, maybe. I think maybe you guys might know a little bit about him. Yeah. So check that out. Thanks for supporting everybody, Daniel. That's really sweet. Yeah, good for you. Pedro, what are the symptoms of withdrawal from love addiction and how do you navigate them? Okay, awesome question. Interesting. Okay. Sorry, I'm reading. There's so many things in here. Hi, there's a lot of people in here. Hi, Michelle, that I didn't see. Oh, you guys said hi, and I just got to the point where everybody's like, hi, we can see it. We can see it. I must have clicked something by accident when I was trying to type. So sorry about that. Okay. So, I'm going to answer like 2-3 more questions here, and then I'm going to call it a night. Okay. So Pedro, what are the symptoms of withdrawal from love addiction? Okay. Great question. So if you guys have ever heard about limerence, anxiously attached individuals tend to experience limerence the most. So limerence is like this sort of extreme high from some kind of connection. Okay. So limerence, and we're going to call limerence and love addiction basically the same thing. Limerence could be a slightly exaggerated form of love addiction. But the anxiously attached individual is the love addict, right? They get those heightened feelings really quickly. Other attachment styles can get this for sure, but not usually to the same degree. And usually they don't hang on to these things as long. And it can be really challenging actually for the anxiously attached individual to go through this. Especially if it's like something doesn't work out or the relationship ends or whatever it is, because there's the withdrawal. It feels like you just can't really get over, or this is what's been reported to me many, many times at least. So I don't know if you're experiencing this personally, Pedro, but I've heard that it can be extremely challenging. So be patient and kind and gentle to yourself through this process. So think of love addiction as an actual addiction. If people can get addicted to addictive things, then you can definitely get addicted to things that are actually actively producing neurochemical reactions in your brain. So let's think of you experience, let's say people experience food addiction and they can't stop eating, food. And well, in that case, right? I mean, I guess we could say sometimes sugar produces dopamine and things like that. But as a general rule, you don't have to be addicted to something that's like, crack or cocaine. You can get addicted to, people get addicted to video games, to porn, to all these different things, right? What I want you to do whenever you're experiencing any form of addiction is notice 2 really important components. Okay, so we're going to put this into love addiction. And I have a course coming out on addiction. And I love this material. So think of an addiction as being something where there's a very deeply unmet need somewhere in your life that you may or may not be recognizing, but you're definitely not taking action to get those needs met. So you have this like peak moment. Like I remember one really good example of this is I remember somebody saying to me once that he was with a dismissive avoidant wife. They were married. They definitely hadn't really worked out many of their challenges. And he was at an event one day and one of his coworkers was chatting with him and touched his face in some way. And he said he felt like, oh my gosh, this instant, like she was just being affectionate. And he felt this like instant, like a tremendous gratification. And then he kept sort of latching on to that need. And what he was basically realizing through that experience is just how deeply unmet that need was. And so when it was presented to him, it was almost like overwhelming for his subconscious mind. It was like his subconscious was latching onto that need and had these very strong limerence like feelings that were really impacting his marriage, right? So think of it as being this deep unmet need, and it's probably multiple. So if that's what you're experiencing, Pedro, or you know somebody who is, go and write out what were the person that I'm addicted to, okay? What were all the needs that they were meeting, and write them all out, as many as possible that you can think of. And then what you have to do is you have to teach your brain that that person isn't going to be the only source of those needs for the rest of your life. So you have to recognize those needs and create conscious strategies to A, meet those needs yourself the most, and B, seek them out from other healthy people in your life, okay? And that's going to break the first part of addiction. The second part of addiction is all the addictive thoughts you have about the person, okay? So let's say it's like this. I was talking to somebody about this not that long ago as well, and she was out of a breakup, and she was saying she just kept thinking about her ex, like just over and over again, everywhere she would walk, everywhere she would go. And so she's in this space where she's almost like helpless to her own thoughts. But we're not, because those thoughts are just thoughts that are circulating on autopilot, and they can be changed at any given time. So what she had to practice doing is every time she would catch herself thinking about her ex and fantasizing about her ex, she had to say cancel, which is in NLP, it's called a pattern interruption. It just helps to like break up this autopilot thinking and kind of interrupt your subconscious mind. It's a good sort of initial tool for reprogramming. And she had to replace it with a thought that was either about how she was going to love herself that way and give those things to herself, or how the relationship didn't work because he was actually quite unhealthy. And usually when there's an addiction, even though that thing is harmful to us, like let's say it's a substance and you keep putting that substance in your body, even though that thing is harmful to us, at a subconscious level, we have stored more positive emotional associations to that thing than negative. So at a subconscious level, you might have somebody you're out of a relationship with, and you know that it's not going to work. You know it wasn't right, and that's why the relationship ended. But you still have more stored positive associations to them than negative, and that's why your brain keeps going back to them. So what you're trying to do is balance out those associations using repetition over time. And so the more you repeat to yourself, hey, this wasn't a healthy thing, what you're doing is you're balancing out that perspective, and that will help to break the addiction. Does that make sense? It's a really important thing and a really powerful thing. So those are the big two parts of addiction. The emotional associations we have built in relationship to the addiction, and the needs that our subconscious mind perceives the addiction as meeting. Okay. Hi, Brian. As I have re-engaged with the dismissive over the last few weeks, they will actively engage in a text or phone conversation and then go silent until I reach out again. This is them not wanting to be vulnerable. This is very textbook avoidant behavior, fearful or dismissive avoidant, and you seem to be really sure that this is a dismissive avoidant person. So it's even more characteristic of dismissive avoidance. So what you want to do is know that that's what's happening, right? And if you really want to re-engage the relationship, then what you also really want to do is actively connect to, like, say, hey, let's go for coffee. Like, actually try to see them in person. If it's been 3 or 4 weeks and you're right at that point, I would try to see her in person, and then I would try to be like just fun, light, easy. Dismissive avoidants really want like the superficial, and they want to take a lot. So even though you've been that way over text or phone communication, and then she pulls back, you're basically restarting that process in person. So you start off, you're fun, light, easy, simple, and then you can sort of get more in depth and connected over time. Also, dismissive avoidants want to know the reasons why the relationship will work this time around. Once you get to that point, don't share those things out of the gates. It's not going to work well. Because then they'll feel like, oh my gosh, there's all this expectation and pressure and commitment, and that'll frighten them. But instead, what you want to do is say things like, when the conversation does happen, let's say 3 or 4 more weeks after seeing her in person and having these light, fun sort of times, then you want to, when you have the conversation, look at like the logistical strategies you can come up with, because dismissive avoidants are very like analytical and calculated. And when they think about re-engaging, they want to know that there's a logical component here that can work. Okay. You guys are so sweet. Thank you. I see like all the highs and we can see it. I see you connected. Hello. I'm here. Hi, Tatiana. Hi, Alex. Some people I didn't see yet, and Tara. Okay. Thank you for sharing that. Okay, so, I love this. So Tatiana is saying, writing it out and working it through yourself, journaling first before bringing it up is a lifesaver. It is a lifesaver. It makes all the difference. Okay, amazing. So we'll be bringing up FAs. If anxiously attached individuals are supposed to sit with themselves before reacting to others, what's a good strategy for FAs? I used to be more AA, but definitely have edged towards DA in later years. Yeah, so you're probably in the middle there, like kind of in the FA space, Tara. The exact same thing for fearful avoidance. Do what the okay, so if you are finding that a lot of your patterns are to avoid confrontation and that's creating an unhealthy set of circumstances, if you're overly avoidant of conflict or of working through to resolution, then you want to work through and become approach oriented. If you find that you're overly anxious and overly approach oriented but you're not working through on your own, then you want to make sure the idea is to come to a space of balance always. So it's a really great question. So just look at where you're expressing and what patterns are more unhealthy for you and target that pattern first. So if AAs are, retracting and are supposed to retract, work through it first, sit with themselves, strategize, meet their needs, and then extend themselves, then if you find yourself more in the DA spot where you're just avoiding conflict and then not speaking up, notice that has a residual impact emotionally over time as well. All that stuff gets stored and it comes out in not so nice ways, in passive aggressive ways, in sort of deeper ways, sometimes like an outburst when there's all this pent up emotion. And so just notice where you're at on that spectrum and come to a space of balance. But again, the idea really is to always work through your story first and then understand your need second. And then for the AAs working on repatterning, meet that need yourself for a while first until that feels normal and habitual. And for the fearful avoidance, what you can do is you can just decide, hey, I can express this need or I can meet the need myself. That part's okay. The fearful avoidance really want to focus on working through their story first because usually they're quite hypervigilant and the stories can be really, really painful and challenging. So, okay, so you guys are absolutely wonderful. I'm going to let you guys go because I said I'd be here for an hour and it's been like an hour and 40 minutes. So I will copy and paste the rest of the chat, like anything that bye. I guess a couple of you guys are saying you have to go and good night because it's probably late for some of you. That's so nice, Ellie. I'm so happy to hear that. Thank you. So yeah, I will definitely do the reparenting video. That's so sweet, Daniel. Thank you, Jermaine. I appreciate that so much. Okay, so what I'm going to do is copy and paste the rest of these conversations just so I have some extra questions for when we do the anxiously attached next live webinar. And I'll start off with those. I think a lot of you guys are just kind of chatting in here now, but amazing questions. Again, I'm like so honored and blessed to be able to do this. I love just talking to people and answering questions. It's probably my favorite thing to do in all of my work. So let me know if you have any pre-questions before the next one. The next one I'm going to do again on dismissive avoidance because everybody was like, oh my gosh, part 2. Want more questions and information there. And then I'll do another on anxious. Then if you guys want another on fearful too, that would be happy to do that. And then we'll dive into some of the other topics, but we'll keep coming back as we go through new topics like anxiety, okay? How this applies to the anxiously attached individual the most and anybody who's experiencing anxiety second. I find attachment styles tend to exhibit anxiety in different ways. For anxiously attached individuals, it's usually very strong and can be a little bit more pervasive. For fearful avoidance, it's usually just heightened anxiety when they feel triggered. And for dismissive avoidance, they usually experience pervasive anxiety as well, but at a lower level. They're kind of in the small fight or flight space. So we'll apply in the webinars and the conversations, just the different ways they apply to different attachment styles. And we'll do that with all of the content. So thank you guys again so much for being here late on Tuesday evening. It might be early for some of you guys on the East Coast. Thank you, Ellie. Love you too. And I'm glad that you're going to be excited for the book. Thank you. You guys are absolutely amazing. Have a great night. Thank you so much. I will, Tatiana, I promise we'll do that as well. And I'll copy any of these questions that I missed. Have an amazing night, guys. Bye. Thanks.